to a brand new episode of Black Tech Unplugged. I have a doctor in the house. So, Dr. KB, welcome to Black Tech Unplugged. I feel like it's been a long time coming, but glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. I look forward to the conversation.
Yes. And for those who are not familiar with you and the wonderful work that you've been doing, want to give a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. I always suck at these, but I am Khalia Braswell, Dr. Khalia Braswell, as of a few months ago. I am a technologist slash educator slash researcher. Kind of found myself in the middle of a lot of different spaces, but I've been in tech for decades now. I've been coding since I was in high school. Got a computer science degree from NC State in North Carolina, a master's in IT from, the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and then most recently my PhD in education from Temple University, where I studied how do we get more Black girls in tech using a virtual summer camp that I ran during the pandemic through my the nonprofit that I started. It's so interesting talking about it in past tense, but in Tech Camp for Girls is still standing strong. And so I was able to write my dissertation about the work that I did with that nonprofit. I love music, tea, and books. And I live in Atlanta, Georgia now.
Yes, everybody's in Atlanta now. I feel
literally everybody. And we're all stuck on 85. It's ridiculous.
Well, I will talk about most of the things that you mentioned in your introduction. I will say we're going to save the organization that you created probably for another episode, because today I want to focus on the PhD portion as well as just like your role in tech, which is going to be great detail anyway.
Yeah, well, the PhD and nonprofit are kind of intertwined, but I got you.
Okay, well, actually, let's start there. So you got your PhD. So let's start with what made you even pursue that path when it comes to your career?
Good question. I was exposed to PhDs and like just research as a career when I was in undergrad. So at NC State in the College of Engineering, most of us took 5 years to graduate. So on my bonus year, I think my junior or senior year, I started doing undergraduate research, and I was like, on my website now, I have that my goal is to make a social change using technology. And that was when I was exposed to it. And so I was working on a research project where we were disseminating information about HIV and AIDS to college age Black women. And it was just really cool to see how technology could be a conduit for information to that population, and that we could research it and actually publish. And so I did quite a few like graduate preview programs specifically for minority students. One of them being at Georgia Tech, which is called Focus, which I think is still running. And it's literally just to give you a crash course on everything you need to know as a minority student going to graduate school, whether that's master's, but mostly PhD. And so my bonus year at NC State, I applied to 3 programs and I did not get into any of them. So I was like, all right, gotta pivot here. And so I did reach out to one of the professors who I thought, I just knew I was going to get into their lab. And their advice to me was to go get a master's degree and then reapply. Essentially, even though my resume was stellar, my grades were not. I struggled to and through the computer science program, but I finished. But in comparison to the other students, right, when they're looking at grades, things of that sort, my transcript just didn't measure up. So I took his advice. I went and got a master's. But then life got a little twisted. I don't know if we want to go there, but the short story is that.
Let's hold off on going there. We'll eventually go there though. But I do want to circle back because you mentioned a couple things that are so key within like a career. One is the art of the pivot. So you think you're going to like do all this stuff and it's like, God said, haha, like, no, your plans ain't going to work today. And
story of my life.
Different direction.
Yeah, story of my life, literally.
But you also mentioned the exposure piece. So being exposed to, the PhD and the graduate level from a computer science or, from whatever perspective, How did you get that exposure? Because a lot of people that look like us don't have that exposure.
Yeah, well, I did research, probably like my sophomore year at NC State, with a professor, but they didn't really tie into like, hey, you could do this as a career, because a lot of times we think PhD, we think professor, which is a right assumption, but I think it can be, as a student, you don't realize all that a professor does. And so, like at Research One institutions, which I'm used to, a lot of them are teaching, sure, but they're also doing research.
Mhm.
And so it took my second research experience to understand, like, oh, okay, there's a connection here. And the professor that I did that, the professor that I did research with the second time was a Black woman, and she had colleagues around the world at these different places. And so she sent us to Clemson University, who at the time, Dr. Juan Gilbert was running a research lab there with like the most Black students. I don't know if that the program was computer science, but it definitely was human centered computing. I'm not
Mhm.
sure where it sat on Clemson's campus, but imagine me and two of my friends from high school that were also with me at NC State rolling up to Clemson and seeing all these more Black engineers getting PhDs. And I think she was also the same professor that sent us to the Georgia Tech program, just to make sure that we knew that that could be an option for us. And so I guess the exposure was as a result of networking and just being connected with folks who knew more about that space than us.
And then so you get the connection. So you go to the master's program. What did you master
Yeah.
in? And what was that experience like for you?
For one, it was humbling, right? Because I didn't want to get a master's. I just wanted to go straight through and get a PhD. And so it's like, all right, I guess I got to go this other pathway to get there, right? And so at UNC Charlotte, so at NC State, we had a College of Engineering where the computer science department sat. At UNC Charlotte, there's a College of Computing where computer science sits, but also information technology. And for them, their IT masters had a human computer interaction concentration. I knew whatever I did, it needed to be interdisciplinary. I needed to be able to do more than just tech classes.
Mhm.
And that master's program that I didn't even know about allowed me to do that. And so my final degree was a master's in information technology with a focus in human computer interaction. And so I had to take software engineering, sure, but I also was able to take a class about the brain. I took a class in the business school as well as an elective. And then I found myself actually going down a path of usable privacy and security.
Mhm.
There's a big conference in that space called SOUPS. I actually presented there. It's like pretty much like a lightning talk. I submitted and presented at Facebook's headquarters, which was super cool. Um, but then I got an internship at Apple, and that just changed the whole game. And I went to Apple for a year, which you generally don't take a year off of a master's, and you generally don't take a whole year to intern. But I mean, they were paying for everything, and it's Apple, right? And so I got there, and I learned how to design, and I learned how to do user research. And I was like, now, why would I go pay? Because I paid for my master's. I did not pay for PhD, and only had to pay for that extra year of my undergrad. But I'm like, why would I go pay to learn when they're teaching me and they're paying me at the same time? That doesn't make any sense. So I almost didn't finish the master's. And after that, I was just like, I'm not even getting a PhD. I'm gonna just work and they're gonna teach me. And, so that was my philosophy for a while. So it's a miracle that I actually got to the other side of the PhD, to be honest.
Well, and also let's track back because so I got my master's. I do not have a PhD. Maybe I'll look into it after our conversation, but not there yet.
No, don't do it.
But even with the masters, like, why is there no money to like, like you do for undergrad and PhD? Why is there no money for masters?
Okay, I'm gonna put you on a little secret. It's not, I don't think it's ethical, but it's not unethical. Some people go because of that, they'll go and they'll apply for a PhD because generally PhDs are fully funded. You're getting paid to go to school. You're not getting paid a lot, but you get paid to go to school, your tuition is paid. And you may have to do like an assistantship or something. I didn't. Happy to tell that story. Um, so some people will go get that full PhD package and do what they call masters out. So they'll stop at the master's degree, graduate, and be like, I'm not going to finish this. I don't know if there's any backlash that they get for that, but it's common. Don't say Khalia said, this is not advice. I'm just telling you that I've heard of this happening. And again, I don't think it's ethical. I think your output will kind of show what you're there for, and your advisor will likely be able to snoop you out. So you don't really want to be in that kind of position, but also it's like that because masters generally are not free in the tech space, which I think is ridiculous. So,
right. I mean, you would think it'd be the other way around. Like your master's would be, well, actually, I take that back. Cause like you said, PhD, you have to get funded, and we could go into details on that in a little bit. But I'm like, why is the middle, the part that you're not giving me any money, but then you think I'm going to come up here to go to this PhD?
I know it doesn't make sense in the grand scheme of things, honestly. And so for me, I was able to graduate undergrad with minimal student loan debt, and it really was only because of that 5th year. I think I maybe had like a $5,000 loan, which in comparison to my peers is nothing. And then for the master's, I got a loan for that first year, but since I took a year off in the middle and was able to go to Apple, they paid for my living expenses. I paid out of pocket for that my last year of my master's. I don't even remember how much it cost. I just remember having it and happily giving it to them so that I wouldn't have to take out a loan. And then when I went back to Apple full time, I paid off that first loan because of the interest rates. The interest rates for a master's degree is way worse than an undergrad degree. It's all twisted, but I don't even want to get on my soapbox about the academy because I will go there.
And don't think I'm going to let you skip over your Apple adventure. So, everyone always wants to work at a FANG company and, all that stuff. What was your experience at Apple?
All right. So I'll talk about my experience at Apple in 2 phases, the internship and the full-time phase. The internship was great. I had some rough patches with management. I'm not even going to lie, but I feel like Apple was never in my purview. Like it was never a goal. And the way that the internship came about, the fact that in the way that I got it, I was just kind of like, okay, I don't have anything to lose here. Like that was kind of my mentality. So I was on like what was called then the African American what was it called? AAEA, African American, I don't know, Black at Apple now. They're ERG. I was like on a leadership team for that. I was part of Women at Apple, and I was like very vocal about some things. I remember, and now I'm cool with her, but like at the time, Denise Young Smith was the VP of HR at Apple, Black woman. And I had a meeting with her my last day. And I told her all the things I went through. Like I just didn't, it wasn't even I didn't care. I think I cared a lot actually. Because as a Black intern, I felt like Apple was putting a lot of effort in recruiting, but not retaining Black talent. Okay. And I just struggled with that because I'm like, it actually wasn't all rosy, right? And when I talk about my full-time experience, that's what I mean, where it's like the microaggressions are there. And my full-time team was pretty diverse. We had not a Black woman, excuse me, we had a woman who was a leader. She was fantastic. She was the reason why I joined that team. And it was a lot of different, right? Like it was actually very diverse in both, both race category and gender, but there was just some weird things going on that team, and I didn't love it. And I started to kind of retreat, if you will, but I think it was less about Apple and more about me wanting to go 100% into the nonprofit. But I just kind of struggled on the work full-time work side. I think that what gave me the most joy was Apple had an HBCU scholar program, and I was able to mentor quite a few students from that. And so the summertime was always great because it's like, oh, we got interns, like, this is going to be great. But then when they would leave, it's like, oh man, there go 2 Black girls, they're gone, they're not going to be here no more. On my team specifically, because in my building, a lot of people, Apple has a lot of different buildings across 2 different cities within the Bay Area. And in my building specifically, as when I was full time, I was the only Black woman in that building. Oh, no. My friend Nisi worked in there too. It's 2 of us, but she was upstairs and I was downstairs. So it felt like I was the only one in that building.
Yeah.
And so just being in a space where I'm the only one and I don't have to be in that space, like I don't prefer it. And I just had to learn that about myself, not specifically to Apple, but also in the Bay Area in general. It was hard coming, because I grew up in North Carolina, so I'm just used to seeing Black people everywhere all the time.
Right.
I talk about this a lot, how a lot of my leaders in tech early on were Black women, men. So it was just jarring, honestly.
I'm curious to hear from your perspective though. What was it like for you being the only one? Especially it sounds like even though you say it's like the only one on that floor, like it's still you're not seeing your friend in meetings. Like, you go in the room and everybody's looking at you because you're the only person that looks like that.
Yeah, it was interesting. You know what? So, okay. So for those who aren't aware, like Apple, the Bay Area is really big and a lot of people live all over and have to commute to work. And Apple has these really big, like Mercedes-Benz coach buses that we catch throughout the city and all that stuff. So I lived in Oakland, so I could see Black people. And I would commute to work about an hour and a half each way a day. So it's about 3 hours on that bus. It's terrible. And so there would be times, I got my afro out now, but I would have my 2-strand twist and I catch the bus so early that I can't take it out. So I throw on the hair wrap until I get to work. Then I take my hair down. There was a time where I walked by some colleagues with my head wrap and they didn't even say hey because they didn't know it was me. And I'm like, come on now. Y'all do not see that many Black women on a daily basis.
Right.
They literally didn't speak. And then I looked back and I saw them look back. And so it was just a very weird, awkward experience. But in the Bay and in tech, like you can come as your full self. So that's 100% what I did.
Yeah.
I didn't wear the hair wrap the whole day, but there would be some times where I would because who cares? No one cared. But the fact that you act like you didn't recognize me because I got a hair wrap on, weird. I had some weird interactions at that company, but I will say I did meet some great people and I learned a lot.
I was gonna say, what's the greatest lesson you learned there?
The greatest lesson that I learned at Apple, I don't know how to package it into one thing, but as a consumer, we're all familiar with like surprise and delight, which is a thing at Apple, and like just how the experience is. You go into the Apple store, you buy a new product, you open it up, like just being very tight on experience is key because that'll keep your customers coming back. And I was able to kind of take that same work ethic with in tech and making sure like end to end from a design perspective and just overall experience, whether that's digital or in person, like that all the T's and the I's are crossed, T's are crossed, I's are dotted, to make it a very welcoming experience for our students and our parents and things of that sort. So.
Nice. I love that because they do have a really good customer experience. Minus not giving you the phone charger now when they give you the phone, but everything else for the most part,
it's a hot mess. Now, I'll agree. Some of the things that Apple does, I'm just kind of like, now who thought of this? But you don't know because as an employee, you can't talk to other employees about what they're working on because it's a secret. And I also didn't like that.
Really?
Yeah, I worked in IT when I was full time, and then when I interned, was that considered IT? I don't think so. But I supported the hardware organization, and so everything I did was internal tools. So I could talk openly about what I did because you more than likely you were using the product that I was working on, and so that allowed me agency to be able to talk freely. But when I'm talking to other people, especially in hardware, like they're working on the next iteration of a product. They can't tell me that.
That's kind of crazy though. Like, so you all just passing each other, can't talk about work. Like, find some other topic to talk about.
Literally, yeah. It was a very interesting place to work for sure.
I think that will be like a fun fact that everyone takes from this episode. The people at Apple are not talking to each other about their work.
No, which I guess could be cool if you don't want to talk about work, but then also it can be awkward because literally it's like people just kind of look at you and like it's like I can't talk about it. I don't know.
Right. I mean, I like you said, I see both sides of the coin. Like, talk about something besides work, but at the same time, sometimes you're like, what are you working on today? And it's like, I can't say.
Yeah, but I had a great time overall. I think looking back at it now, I can talk more fondly now that I've processed all the things. And one of my Intech students is interning at Apple this summer, and she came to us when she was in the 6th grade. So it's always great for that kind of stuff. I know, right? Crazy. Just
That's like,
crazy.
talk about full circle moment.
Yeah, and she's an HBCU scholar too. So
oh, wonderful. And I know that you mentioned Intech. So for the people who are listening and who are not familiar with Intech, let's like break down what that is, how that got started.
I can talk to y'all about the Intech that I started. It's pivoted a little, which is not a bad thing. So in April 2014, I received a grant from the National Center for Women in Information Technology for a one-day camp at UNC Charlotte. That event grew into Intech Camp for Girls, a nonprofit whose mission was, I think it shifted, to inform and inspire girls to innovate in the technology industry. And so in its infancy, I would do one-day camps. And then that evolved into 1-week camps for middle school girls. And then once the middle school girls aged out, they started asking me for more things. And so we were able to launch a virtual Intech Academy. We did a pilot right before the pandemic. And the pandemic happened, and it was like, all right, well, we kind of leaned into virtual programming. And so started training girls in technology in high school and during the pandemic on Zoom. So very rewarding work, but I just decided that I wanted to step down. So hired an executive director who's leading the charge now.
And to just be clear with people who are listening, were you doing that while you were at Apple?
Yes, Intech started my first year of my master's. And then I moved to California to work at Apple. When I came back, we hosted 3 camps in one day in 3 different cities in South Carolina. Every time I talk about it, even all these years later, it's insane. But that was with Teach for America, South Carolina, which was an amazing folks to work with, but also amazing that we were able to do that. And then I think the next year, so 2016, we partnered with the Urban League of Central Carolinas in Charlotte to do a 1-week camp in Charlotte. And that was the same year I graduated from my master's and went back to Apple full time. So then as we continued to scale, yes, I was working full time. And then I stopped working at Apple in January of 2018 and was running Intech full time until March 2022.
Now, how are you balancing all of that? Because that's just like, even like think about it, I'm like, ooh, I don't like, I feel like you have like 4 different versions of you in 4 different cities.
Yeah, that's accurate actually. It's kind of crazy how that works. So yeah, there are. My best version of myself is in Atlanta though, because I have my friends. I don't do all of this stuff no more. I just work.
Right.
No, it was kind of crazy. So when I was working full time at Apple and trying to run Intech from the West Coast, it was pretty wild because I remember like we did a camp at NC State, which is where I graduated from, and luckily my friends were running that camp because I was in charge of like ordering the food every morning.
Okay.
Morning my time, but lunchtime their time. And like there was a time when they had like ran out of food, but they didn't tell me that. So it was just kind of like, well, we're just gonna make this work. But those are the kind of people they are though. It's not like, hey, we have a problem. It's like, no, let's pivot. We later worked with NC State to help pay for us to eat in the dining hall. So crisis averted. But like literally, I'm like waking up, starting my West Coast day, and they're halfway through camp, and then I'm trying to get a debrief after my work day. And so it was a lot of back and forth, but shout out to all of my friends in this space in tech who stepped up to help. My best friend and I, we used to live together in Oakland, and she's a fashion stylist, but worked full-time at Gap. And so we literally we would pick one day for the weekend where we're having fun, and then the other day where we're working. Sometimes we would do both in one day. It's like, all right, we're going to do our side hustle in the morning, but in the afternoon, we're at the party, or vice versa. I don't think I could do that in my 30s. In my 20s, it sounds crazy, but I was able to do it. Because again, my commute was 3 hours a day. I was trying
Right.
to go to the gym. Like, I can't even imagine. It's making me tired talking about it, to be
And like,
honest.
even thinking just to relate it to now where we were in the pandemic, everybody was working from home. So, you know, you had all this extra time. We didn't have to commute. You could do whatever. Like if you wanted to take a walk during the day, you can do it. Now we're starting to
Yeah,
transfer back, you know, transition some places, not all, because I have hope for some people. Transition back to the office. And like some days, because I have to go in ever so often. And I'm
yeah.
like, okay, you go into the office and you're like, okay, if I go in now, then like, when do I work out and like make dinner?
I
Like, when
can't
do I
imagine.
commute? So it's like, I can only imagine you're doing this 3 hour commute every day. Let's be clear. It's not like you're, you know, going once a week, every day.
Every day.
And then
I
it's
was taking intake
live.
calls on the Apple shuttle. Like it was just it was crazy now I'm thinking about it. Um yeah, no, I can't I don't know that I can ever do that commute again. There was
Yeah.
a time like a few months ago where I met up with some colleagues at WeWork and
Mhm.
it took me forever to get out the house. I was so stressed about the planning. Um and then there was another time where I flaked on them. So I was like, I really need to get to the gym, but like for me to meet up with them and make it a day that was like worthwhile and working together, I technically should have went earlier or just like asked the gym, but I was determined. So I was like, all right, I'm on the way. And then somebody was like, well, I think I'm about to leave now. I was like, well, I'll catch y'all on the next one. It's terrible. I can't, it's too much. It's too much.
But I mean, that's all the process of like one, learning your like how you operate. But
Yeah.
then two is like also eventually you get to that place where you're like, you're in a groove and this is what works for me. And y'all, either I'm gonna see you or I'm not. Like, sorry to y'all.
Yeah. Yeah. I just was like, well, next time, next
Well,
time.
so we talk about pivoting a lot in like the work piece, but I want to dig deeper into the PhD program. Like,
Okay.
why did you even go? Like, what did where I know you were determined originally. You had the, you know, you kind of had to make a pivot. You had to make that right to come back. But
Yeah.
what made you still even want to go after you were working at Apple and you're getting all this experience?
So I was still in contact with that community. So a lot of folks in the computer science education space, my professors at UNC Charlotte. And so I've always still had a network of folks in the academy, if you will. And a lot of my friends have PhDs, which I recognize now it's not common. We've made it normal. But anyway, so I quit Apple January 2018. I was not receiving any, I was not getting paid by Intech, but I took the risk to jump in and just say, hey, let me just do this full time. But I still needed money, right? And so
Mhm.
I taught a summer program in Charlotte for high school students. I think it was called Tech Charlotte. It doesn't exist anymore. It was with the city though. And so students got tech training from me, professional development training from two of my friends, which I think one of them has been on your podcast, Letitia Bird. And then I think the second half of the summer, they went off and had internships. And so then I also did that same summer, I taught the Computer Science Summer Institute at Johnson C. Smith, and that was a Google program. And so I taught Python and front end development to incoming freshmen for 3 weeks. So the first 2 weeks were in class instruction, and then the last week was like them building their own product. And so that kept me paid. But what I realized was one, that I liked teaching, but two, I was very curious about computer science teachers because I'm like, at that point, I had two computer science degrees or two technical degrees.
Mhm.
And there were questions I was getting from my students that I couldn't necessarily answer in the moment.
Yeah.
And it made me wonder, well, what are computer science teachers doing who don't have technical degrees or technical work experience, but they're teaching computer science, whether it's by choice or by force, because their principal told them to, just because they taught math, things of that sort. It happens a lot in K-12. And it just made me curious. And so my advisor the person who became my advisor at Temple, she and I met up for dinner in Philly in November of 2018, so the same year that I quit Apple. And first of all, I told her I'd never move to Philadelphia. Joke's on me. But then second, I was like, just having this conversation, because I wasn't able to have it at a scholarly level. And she encouraged me to come to a conference with a special interest group for computer science education. It was in March of 2019. She's like, just come and see, what people are talking about, what kind of research they're doing, and just see, maybe the PhD will come back around. Maybe this is something you could study and find out. And so I went to the conference, and I was very energized by the conversations that were being had. And it was at that conference when I realized, like, I knew to get into a PhD program, it was all new, but I didn't know that, like, the powers that be could just say, who cares if it's March? If you want to get a PhD, you can come start in the fall. Because I'm thinking by March, the application deadline is over for going to grad school. So it's March 2019. I'm at dinner, and someone literally says, well, if you want to come get a PhD, like, I have funding, you can come in the fall. I came to that conference thinking, oh, I'll get a PhD in 2020, if it's on the table. I'll keep thinking about it, take the rest of the year, have some conversations. So I left that dinner like, I can get a PhD now? I was kind of confused. And so anyway, there were some folks who I look up to who were at that conference, Black women who I trust, and I was having a conversation with them. And so that changed everything. And I called that my advisor back, the same person who I told I would never move to Philadelphia. I called her back after the conference and said, hey, so I didn't know that this was possible for this year. Like, what do you think? I'm running in tech full time. I I don't know. I was not expecting that. At the end of the conversation, I said, well, do you have funding for a PhD student? And she was like, oh, I'll find some funding if you want to come. And about a week or two later, she emailed me like, got a full ride to Temple. Here's what I would pay you. Here's your insurance. Your tuition is paid. And at the very bottom of that email, she mentioned that Temple's grad school has 2 fellowships, and she's like, I think it's already closed, but I'm gonna go talk to them. Okay, cool.
Right.
Wow. First of all, I'm going to grad school. I got a full ride. Like, let's do this. But then secondly, like, I'm doing this now, right? And so then she called me a few days after she sent me that email and said that not only did I get one of the fellowships at the graduate school, they wanted to offer me both of them, but you can't take them both. So after the deadline had passed, it's probably late March, early April at this point. Okay. So I got into grad school, and the fellowship was great because it doesn't require you to do any graduate assistantship or teaching assistantship. So earlier I mentioned that a lot of times to go for free, there's some kind of labor involved, whether you're doing research or you're doing your TA,
right,
or both. And I didn't have to do any of those things, and I still was able to get my stipend. Although, I mean, you're doing your own research, so like, you're not having to do, apply for research assistantships or things of that sort. It's like guaranteed funding for 4 years for you to do your work. And so the rest was history after that.
So let's break down what that funding is and like what that actually looks like. Because some people might think funding, I'm gonna just take this cash and go on, or maybe just go get my master's and we'll be fine. But I want to break it down so people, understand the work that actually goes on behind the scenes.
So I can give you the fellowship perspective and maybe try to give you the non-fellowship perspective, but I'll say this. Sometimes there's money at the university. Also, I need to preface this with the fact that I'm specifically talking about research one universities, and generally you have professors who are doing research. They probably have grants, and they have funding, as in they can pay you a stipend and your tuition for you to help them with their research. And so that's generally how it goes in the computer science engineering disciplines. It's not the same in each discipline. Definitely want to make sure I say that. So I came into Temple as a computer science PhD student, and that's the norm. And so you're pretty much tied to your advisor at that point because you're doing their work and they're paying for your schooling. And then once you get some experience under your belt, you can start doing your own research and then get into the dissertation phase. And so that's usually the trade-off. It's, I'm a professor, I may have a research lab, I may have open space, I may not have any students, I may be recruiting students. Like, it really is on the professor and what they have the capacity for. And generally that gets you your tuition paid, you get a stipend, and tuition paid, stipend, sometimes insurance. I've heard of graduate students still having to pay for their own insurance. Mine was covered. My fees were not covered. So every semester I had to pay whatever the student fees were. And then oftentimes if you get accepted to a conference to present, your advisor will cover it, or maybe your fellowship will cover it. Or if your advisor is going, they may take you along and pay for the hotel and the registration and everything and your flight. I'm trying to think of all the things, but there are a lot of fellowships out there for folks who want to go study computer science or engineering. I didn't apply to any outside funders, so I didn't get any extra money on top of what Temple gave me. It was a personal choice. By then, I was getting a stipend from Intech, and it was enough for me to live. If I didn't have that stipend, it wouldn't have been enough. My fellowship was $32,000. I'll be transparent because it's over now, but each year of me being at Temple, I was paid $32,000. And that was because I had the Presidential Future Faculty Fellowship. I don't even know what folks are getting paid without that fellowship, because what do you mean this is the most a graduate student can get paid? Another soapbox that I like to get on. Yeah, so it's not, I don't know, is that a livable wage? I don't know. Not in Philadelphia.
So
I don't think so either. But literally, I've had this conversation with my advisor, and she's like, "I could pay you more. I would pay you more if I could." She literally couldn't.
Wow.
Yeah. But professors, again, specifically, I can't speak to other disciplines. STEM, engineering, computer science, like, that's the way it works. Which is why it's good to know the professors doing the research, because then you can reach out to them to see if they have funding for you. I don't think anybody should pay for a technical PhD. That's not ideal at all.
Good point. And I actually want to circle back to that, because you mentioned like you had the network to get this opportunity, right? So you went to a conference, you were talking to people. How do people, if they want to get into want to get a PhD, and right now they might not have that network, how do you start building that? So you don't want to have to get ready later on. You want to be ready, when you're ready.
Literally, that's a good point, because I think that's what helped me the second time around. Honestly, Twitter was a great space to meet academics. A lot of the folks that I know are on Twitter. I don't know how much longer that'll last. Let me think. That's a great question. I mean, because I'm trying to think beyond like following professors, right? Like, 9 times out of 10, if there's something that you want to study, there is a conference that exists for it. So maybe following the conference. So like, I'm in the computer science education space. SIGSE, the Special Interest Group for Computer Science Education, is one of the largest spaces to publish. And so, maybe going on their website and just reading a few papers and following folks who are writing about things that you're interested in. And maybe, I think, I'm not sure how much it costs to join like the special interest group. So I'm trying to think of like cost effective ways even. There are probably different groups on Facebook and or LinkedIn around folks who have PhDs in certain disciplines, that may be willing to allow folks who don't have PhDs for that networking opportunity. Right. A lot of the folks who I know with PhDs I met through NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers, just friends and colleagues who ended up going the full route. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other ways, but being a part of those professional organizations and kind of learning who's in it and who's doing what is one of the better ways.
Okay. And so you get into the PhD program, you're doing everything. One thing I want to call out is you are not working full-time and doing this PhD. Like, it's not, that can't happen. Like,
Well, I was running in tech full time and doing the PhD.
okay.
So I mean, because at one point I had like a full staff, and yeah, it got out of hand really quickly. But for me, my PhD classes, all Temple grad classes, were at 5:30 p.m. And
Okay.
so at the beginning, I was like trying to be a super student and like I'm on campus early and all day. And then I'm like, okay, I don't need to do this. I got burned out really quickly.
Ooh.
And so I had to kind of like restructure my days in a way that worked for me. I got really anal about my calendar for Intech. So I was not taking meetings before 10 a.m. and I would only take meetings on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And I had a window for those meetings. I knew like, okay, I need to be on campus no later than 5 to find a parking spot, eat dinner if I decide to do that. Like, I had to learn how to make it sustainable.
Right.
But when you're taking a full load of classes, it is not ideal to be in a to work full time um or try to run a business. It's not sustainable. I burned out several times, which is probably why I'm not part of Intech right now, to be honest. It became to be too much. Yeah, it just became to be too much. Honestly though, Dina, I don't even suggest people getting a PhD.
Why? Okay, let's talk about it. Why do you not suggest people to get a
Why?
PhD?
Okay, to be fair, I went because one, it was a goal that I made years ago, right? But two, I literally had something because I think what happened, I talk about how, oh, I went to Apple and I decided I didn't want to get the PhD anymore. I wasn't interested in anything enough to be committed to a PhD. To say I want to make a social change using technology is cute, but like, what does that mean? But
Right.
the second time around, I knew like I want to do research about computer science teachers in the K through 12 space. Like I was very like clear, not saying that you need that, but you need something because
Right.
getting a PhD is time consuming and is labor intensive. It can be, and it is very political. So beyond taking the courses, beyond doing the research, it's political. I mean, I think everything probably is at this point, but like
Mhm.
having to manage an advisor, manage a committee, dealing with things that, in my opinion, sometimes are unnecessary,
Mhm.
happens to everybody. And some people's stories are worse than others. I think I made it out okay, but I did have some bumps in the road where I had to like let go of a committee chair, not the advisor who I spoke about who helped me get the funding. At the
Mhm.
time, she was only a computer science professor. By the time I finished, she had dual appointment in the education school because I didn't even talk about. Actually, this is wrapped up in it. I left the computer science PhD program and I almost quit the whole thing, but we found a workaround by me switching into education because I was able to do the same research. The classes were just different and it was a much better environment for me. So the fact that I failed a class my first semester, my first year, I had to report a professor and I switched programs, like you
What?
shouldn't have to do all that. It's not even
Right.
common for people to switch programs at a PhD level. But I do have friends who, for various reasons, had to switch universities during their program. And so then when that happens, the requirements change and you may be in there longer. And so I'm just saying all this to keep it real. Like you gotta really want it. Some folks want to just be called doctor. None of this is um something that you want to go through just to be called doctor on the other side, I promise.
Right. Let's go back to like some of the failures because you done shocked me, and I just need to be
Let's talk about it.
back to earth. Okay, let's start with the failed class. Like, what happened?
Data structures.
Oh,
It's terrible class. It was a terrible class when I took it at NC State. It was a terrible class when I took it. Actually, I don't think I took data structures. It was some. I took another. I think just took like a software engineering class in my master's. That was more bearable. But those algorithms took me out. And also my grandfather passed at the beginning of 2020 when I was taking this class, and so, but I still was determined. Right? It's like,
right.
all right, I'm familiar with this content. Um, what I found, because I took a few education courses my first year, even though I was not in that program yet, because we were trying to make a computer science education degree, which still doesn't exist, but we tried. Or my advisor is trying. And so anyway, what I realized is that the environment and the climate of the classroom is different in computer science than it was in education. In education, they treat you like colleagues already, right?
Right.
We're calling our professors by our first name. We're able to just raise our hand and say what we have to say. There's healthy dialogue happening. The professors over there own their mistakes, because I mean, we all make them. In computer science, everybody is intimidated. The professors are trying to intimidate you. It's not a healthy culture of, I want you to succeed. It's a culture of, well, you failed, you know? And so basically for data structures, the first few homeworks, I wasn't making great grades on. And so, but then I started killing it, right? I'm making 100s on homework and I still failed the class. Here's how. The syllabus was set up in a way where your homework was worth 30% of your grade. No. Your homework was worth 10 or maybe 20% of your grade. The exams were what was worth majority of the grade. So I feel like, I don't remember the breakdown, but let's say your midterm is worth 30%, your finals worth 30%, and then the other 40 is your homework. So the odds are stacked against you, no matter if you do great on homework anyway, because what really matters are those tests. But what I learned in education, you know, they'll have quizzes, they have multiple exams. So it's not just two that you're like stressing out about. You know, they do formative assessment, whereas in computer science, it's 2 exams, you got 2 shots. And if you don't make it, sorry, good luck. I mean, great, you did great on your homework. It's a gold star. And so that's basically what happened. I did great on homework. I tried to do my best. When I did the midterm, I was in a state of grief, and I had already reached out to the dean of students for that and like got extensions on homeworks, but I don't know where my mind was. I probably should have pushed the exam or asked for something. And so I didn't do well in the midterm, and that messed me up. And so I did study and try to pass the final, but yeah, so I got an F on my transcript, a big old F at this big PhD. But in contrast, I just want to contrast the education. One of the last classes I took was some advanced data science class, which I shouldn't have taken that class as my last elective. It was so insane. But anyway, it was like statistics on steroids.
No.
I don't know why would I do that to myself? Like, and so anyway, the professor was great, but the first homework we did, I answered, let's say it's 10 questions. I answered 9 of the questions. When I tell you that professor asked me to the end of class, the end of the semester, hey, Khalia, can you answer this last question so I can grade this homework? I was fully prepared to get a 90. He wanted me to answer that last question. I left it on blank on purpose. I don't know the answer. He hounded me. That would have never happened in computer science.
What?
Yeah, he hounded. He's like, can you just answer that last? And I'm like, no, I don't just grade it. I don't need a 100. I promise. It's okay.
Right.
So the climate was just different. And I just realized like, I can't do this anymore. I did it in undergrad, right? Like I hustled to try to get the grades and just doing hard things. And I'm like, I don't need this.
Right. Well, speaking of hard things, so you talk about this committee and like, let's explain why you need a committee when you're getting a PhD, but then also some of the struggles that you went through.
Absolutely. So essentially for a PhD, and this is specifically for a PhD, I think it may look different with different degrees at this level. So like there's like an EDD, which is a little different. I can't speak to it because I didn't get one of those. But generally, after you pass your coursework, in most programs, there's some kind of comprehensive exam that you have to take, which I think is pretty standard across all of the PhD disciplines. For me, my comprehensive exam was a research proposal. I had to do like a mock syllabus for a class that I might want to teach. I think I did an intro to computer science education. I had to do like a teaching statement and probably my CV. But the biggest thing in that is the research the research plan or whatever. And that tells your committee that you're ready. And so like with the committee, you have a chair. So that's the person who says, hey, Khalia, you're ready to be, you're ready for the next level. But it's a committee because you need other people around so that that one person can't, hold you back, or, it's kind of a checks and balances, if you will. And each department has a different requirements. So for the College of Education at Temple, for the PhD in education specifically, you have to have a chair, and we had sub disciplines. So my focus was science, math, and education technology. And so in each sub discipline that you fit in, you needed another committee member from that discipline and one that wasn't in that discipline. And again, it's checks and balances. And then you can also invite external members to your committee. So that means that they're not a Temple professor, and it's just paperwork that you have to fill out. I was grateful that I had an external committee member, Dr. Yolanda Rankin at Florida State University, because she writes a lot about intersectionality in computer science and how do we use intersectionality to talk about Black women and Black girls, along with her colleagues. And so, yeah, it's there for checks and balances, but it can get nuanced, right? Because if you have a really big committee, let's say you have like 6 people, that's 6 people you have to wrangle to get signatures, 6 people you need to wrangle to be on a Zoom call, 6 people you trying to wrangle to read your dissertation or whatever else, or your proposal, which they may or may not read. 6 people that you need to schedule a date to defend or propose your dissertation. So it gets really nuanced. I think I had just a 3 plus another person that they require to be on your committee. I actually had 4 women on my committee. My core committee was 2 Black women and then a white woman. So it was pretty diverse, which was great. Well, it was reflective of me, which was great. I'll say that.
Okay.
But I don't know that I don't know how all programs work. For me, I was able to select all of my committee members. But one of the committee members I mentioned, who was my previous chair before my actual chair was able to be in that position, I learned a lot about trusting my gut in that he was part of my proposal. And the proposal is where you say, hey, this is what I want to do my dissertation on. And, it's a very long document, and you present it to them and they say yes or no, or they say, yes, but make these changes, that kind of thing. And I had a situation where, and they tell you that right when you're proposing, right? So you propose, they go off into a breakout room if it's virtual. They come back, they say you pass, or maybe you didn't pass, or you pass but make these changes. We want to see these changes on your dissertation. And he decided that he, I guess, didn't agree with the rest of the committee. I was told I passed my proposal. Cool. Send me the notes. I'll make sure I include them in my dissertation.
Right.
He sent me the notes, but it was like 2 phases. It was like, because there was a paper that has to get signed in 30 days after you propose. I sent the paperwork. I get an email back that says, I need you to do these things. And then for your dissertation, I need you to do these things. So basically, the situation was he didn't agree that I could move on until I did those things that he needed to check off his list.
Right.
The rest of the committee was unaware because I talked to them about it. The issue is, after I proposed like in May, I proposed on May 11th actually, and it was summertime, So right. The person who ended up being my chair, who was my advisor all along, she had stuff that she was doing. My external committee member, Yolanda, she had stuff that I couldn't contact them for 2 weeks, basically. Ooh. And by the time I got to them, I'd already done the work before I could say, hey, are you aware that he asked me to do this stuff?
Right.
And they were all like, no, we thought you passed. And so now I'm in this situation where, and the craziest thing, Dena, is that he read the intersectionality book and we talked about it. And one of the tenets of intersectionality that Patricia Collins writes is power structures, power. And I'm talking about how power keeps Black girls out of computer science. And he exerted his power over me moving on to the next phase. And I just couldn't
Right.
believe it. I was like, wait a minute. You read the book and you're still doing this as a white man? Seriously? But as a PhD student, I'm in a rock and a hard place, right? Because it's like, do I have that conversation with someone who does have power at this point, or do I let someone else have that conversation? And so, our research advisor agreed to have the conversation, but it took longer than necessary for it to happen. But the conversation was finally happening. It finally happened, and we were able to remove him and get him replaced. He emailed and apologized, and I'm like, email isn't the modality for this conversation, but let me make sure you are aware of the irony here, right?
Right.
Again, these are things, the dissertation is stressful enough, right?
Right.
Doing that is stressful enough. Me having to have this committee restructuring, I'm just like, I shouldn't be doing this, I should be doing my research. So anyway, make sure y'all want to get a PhD. Is all I'm saying. My committee ended up being very great. Again, they helped me and they pushed me. Yolanda, who was an external member, was great in making sure that I was using intersectionality as a framework and not just saying I was using it because I had a black girls, an intersectional population essentially as my research subjects. Like, well, not research subjects because that's a whole other story. Anyway, they weren't research subject. I wasn't studying then. I want to make sure I clear that up on the record, but it was more like a partnership because I made sure that the students were aware why I was doing that work, why I was interviewing them, and let them read the information too. So,
yeah. And you keep mentioning you do not recommend getting a PhD. Why are you saying that?
I just exhibit A, B, C, D, right? No, I say that because it's just, okay, here's a real reason why I say that. And because I'm going to clear it up because I know you have a tech audience. You don't need a PhD in tech, in the tech industry. You just don't. Like, the job I ended up getting full time, 3 of us had PhDs, but that was like ironic that happened. You don't need like I was doing user research as a profession, but I was doing user research at Apple. I didn't have a PhD. I could have continued to do user research and move up the ranks without a PhD. And so I think when I say don't get one, really what I'm trying to communicate is that is a lot. There are so many moving parts. You can absolutely 100% do it. You can do it and get to the other side in a way that does not harm you. There's a lot of harm done in the academy. And I just think that you got to be real clear about why. I had somebody actually, they're in the sciences, they tell me they want to get a PhD, right? All these people are inspired by me now. And I'm like, oh no. And so I said, well, why? And they were like, management. And I was like, a PhD isn't going to teach you how to manage.
Right.
Half of these people don't know how to manage. I'm like, I'm surviving my program because I know how to manage up and I know how to manage myself. Like, I can manage myself and my advisor because my advisor is not managing me, let me tell you. And I'm like, she does have a master's and she's been working for like 8 or 10 years. I'm like, get a career coach and finesse your resume to get a management job. You'll be fine. You don't need this extra debt. Like, they're going to pay for it. It just didn't make sense.
Right. And to wrap up our conversation today, because you mentioned, so you got your PhD, you graduated, you all that, obviously, because you're a doctor, but you mentioned, you're still doing user experience researching. So how do you foresee putting your PhD, I was going to say to work, but you don't want to put your PhD to work, but how do you foresee yourself using your PhD in the future?
I don't know what God has planned for me. No, I really don't. I thought I was gonna go and be a professor and do research and go that route, but I was exposed to a lot through my experience, but also my mentors, and decided like, hey, you guys are doing a lot of work and not getting paid a lot for it. For instance, a lot of people don't know that these multi-million-dollar grants that professors get, the universities take a very large overhead off the top. they have to write that into their grants. It could be as low as 40% or as high as 55 off the
What?
top. When I was writing grants for Intech Camp for Girls, all that money was ours because they put so much effort into like writing the grants, and then you're not, the university just takes half. What? It takes a lot, and so it's like that. And then I have mentors who just have not had good experiences in the academy, and I think this translates across all industries. But I'm like, why would I willingly put myself in that situation and not get compensated for it? And so my mentality on that may change. I'm very open to teaching. I'm very open to still doing research. I think one of the things that I wanted to kind of see through with the PhD is getting one of those multi-million-dollar grants, even if I'm not the main PI, even if I'm just like a principal investigator, to not use acronyms. But I'm also interested in helping like other grassroots nonprofits get published, because they're doing amazing work, but may not be on the research side and may not be getting published. Intech didn't get published until I wrote the articles about it, the research articles. And so just kind of being a conduit in between smaller organizations and like the academy. But during my time, I did decide like, hey, I want to get back in tech. I kind of cut my career short there. I kind of cut it. So like, let's go. And so I was a senior user researcher at Crunchbase till I got laid off. I don't mind sharing that, but now I'm enjoying fun employment and trying to figure out, well, what is next? Will I put my PhD to work? Will I do something else? Will I pivot again? Just gotta stay tuned to find out, because I do not know.
And also to break it down, because some people might be like, what's a user experience researcher? What exactly does it mean, like from a job perspective?
So for a job and career perspective, the user researcher or user research team generally sits somewhere within product or design, and you're working with product. So that could be a product marketer, that could be a product manager. You're working with designers and you're working with engineers. In my last role, I actually worked with a lot of folks in marketing, and you're basically the voice of the user within the company. And you're trying to make sure that your colleagues are making user-based decisions. So that means that they are using the data that you as a researcher captured, whether that's in a survey or in user interviews, and you're collecting these insights to then take back to the team to say, here's how the users responded, to make sure that they're not just creating things, let's make this button green today. Well, why are you making that button green? I just felt like it. No, the users are not going to respond well to a green button. Like, you want to make sure that folks are making decisions that make sense for the people who are actually using it. And so you're literally going to bat for them. And again, some of the things that I would do is user interviews. And so I might interview, let's say 10 people about the same thing to get their feedback. Maybe it's about, the way a web page looks or the interaction that they're having. It's great because you're agnostic, right? You didn't design it, you didn't engineer it. And so you have no feelings. It's like, please be honest. And then you take that information back and gently tell your colleagues whether or not it worked. That's generally called the design validation. Sometimes you're just kind of doing some exploratory research to see, AI is a hot topic right now. How are folks responding to AI? Do they want to see AI? You're literally having conversations and then taking that data back to an engineer or a product manager, product marketing person, or a designer to say, hey, here's how they responded. You can do surveys to see how people respond to different things. And I like that work because I do like to talk. I'm not a coder. That's why I love this space. I love being able to advocate for the user and things of that sort. I'm not sure if I'm going to pivot and like stay on this path, but it does give me joy. And I like it as a career.
I love to hear that when someone says a role brings them joy, because it is a little bit rare in the tech, world.
Yeah.
So to wrap up, what advice, tips, wisdom, whatever that we haven't mentioned already that you would that you want to give to the listeners today?
What advice? The advice I would give, do you want me to be specific about something that we talked about, or just in
No,
general?
it could be anything that you want.
Okay. So we talked about how I was working in Apple and running in tech. I was running in tech by itself, and I was getting a PhD. One of the things that was pivotal for me during the pandemic specifically was realizing how stress showed up in my body. And we didn't talk about that, but this is the longest I've been in therapy. And I just realized that, like, hey, I have to reduce my stress because that's going to, one, help me live longer, but like, it's just not sustainable to be stressed all the time. And stress can be good or bad, right? Just you stress. But I realized that, like, living that lifestyle wasn't sustainable for me anymore. And so that's my advice, is to recognize stressors in your life and how you can reduce them. Because whether we realize it or not, it is showing up in our body, like physically. Case in point, when I defended my dissertation on February 24th. I tried to get that date pushed back, and they were like, no, you chose the date, we're gonna stick with it. You get 30 days after you defend your dissertation to like make any edits that your committee required of you. And so while you can exhale a little bit, it's still very stressful because it's like, oh man, now I have to write some more. I don't even want to look at this document anymore. Like, am I not a doctor yet? I went and got a massage in April after all that was done, and I floated out of that massage envy. I was like, oh my God, I was still carrying it. Even though I submitted the final document, I was still carrying so much of that stress in my shoulders and just in my body. And so, don't try to do all the things, y'all. It's okay to just step back and do one thing at a time, not multiple. So.
And then I have one more question, because you mentioned you're on your fun employment.
Employment.
You're in the unknown, right? You're kind of just like,
yes.
What advice you have for others? Because a lot of people are in that. Like, let's be real. There's a lot of layoffs going on. Like, how do you stay motivated and encouraged? What wisdom and advice do you have from that perspective?
So the first time I found myself in this kind of space, it was when I left Intech, and all I had left was the PhD. And it was a lot of like, what's next? And that actually kind of triggered me in a way where it's like, I don't know what's next, and I'm okay not knowing what's next, and just pushing back on the narrative that we have to know what's next. And so I was with it then. Right now, I had to kind of get back here and recognize the beauty in the unknown, and just take the time to exhale. So I shared before we recorded, I'm in Cancun. If you can afford a vacation, it doesn't have to be in Cancun, but like, I think getting away has helped reset and shift my thinking along all of it. But there is beauty in the unknown, and there's more. And you know what? My motto last year was giving up the good for the great. And I believe I'm in that season again. My last job was great. It was good, but I think there's something greater in store, and just really being, do the things that bring you joy, and be surrounded by people, that also bring you joy and that can continue to pour into you. I think that's what's helped me as well.
And also coming off, I'm going to use that phrase, giving up the good for the great, because we need it.
Yes. Listen, everything I did last year, like, there was everything I did that was like, that felt good. Because I even moved out of like the apartment I had been living in Philly and did some temporary housing. Even that got better, right? Like, everything that I wanted to hold on to that just felt so good. It's like, why am I disrupting this? Like, literally, there would be greater on the other side. Down to like switching my I had a storage unit in Philly that I used to keep Intech stuff in.
Okay.
I switched my storage unit because I had some sketchy stuff happening in mine. Went to a greater situation, a brand new space. It was cheaper, closer. I was like, look at that. It would have been easier to just keep all my crap in one place and not move it, but it got so much better. Like, literally, small examples like that to bigger ones. The good got greater.
Yes, I love that. And Khalia, if people want to reach out to you or connect with you outside of the podcast, where can they
Yeah.
find
I talk about random things on Twitter at at Khalia Braswell. I think the name is at Dr. KB, or it's Dr. KB, but the handle is just at Khalia Braswell. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't generally give out my Instagram, even though it's public, but the Instagram is at Dr. Khalia Braswell. That's why I got them twisted. But I like connecting with people on Twitter more. I think I'm also on LinkedIn as Dr. Khalia Braswell as well. And I have a website, KhaliaBraswell.com. I don't update it, but that's where you can find out all the things that I don't generally talk about because why?
you? Well, I will put all of that in the show notes, but thank you for the wonderful conversation today. Definitely enjoyed you. And I know that this is going to help a lot of people who are listening. So just want to say thank you and I appreciate you.
No problem. Thanks for having me.